Yami's Resurrection era is infamous among the Bleach community for turning the weakest Espada into supposedly the strongest at the flick of a page, transforming Yami from the 10th Espada to the Zero Espada, what was once in itself a pseudo-mythical position that, as far as the fanbase was concerned, could have preferably been bestowed upon pretty much any other character. And yet, while I too have picked Yami's twist reveal apart over the years many times, there is something inherently fascinating about it as well, specifically regarding Yami's second form, which he adopts after Byakuya and Kenpachi enrage him sufficiently, though we never get to see it in action, as the story cuts away at the moment of reveal, only to return many chapters later once Yami was already defeated. And therein lies my fascination. Yami's Resurrection may be controversial, and for good reason, let's face it, but it's also intriguing in the way it did so many really weird things for the very first time. We'd never seen an Espada's rank change with their Zanpakuto release, that was for sure, and we'd also never seen an Espada take on a second form in this way. I mean, oh sure, Ulquiorra revealed his Segunda Etapa a few volumes prior, a second stage to Resurrection akin to a Shinigami's bankai that was completely unique to him, but there's just something different about what happens with Yami. And it's not like we haven't seen multiple Arrancar undergo changes even during their Resurrection. Two members of Barragan's Fraction, Gio Vega and Abirama Redda, seem to access a second form of sorts in the midst of their fights, for example, but again, there is something distinctly unique about Yami's second form that, well, I want to discuss today. For you see, Yami doesn't just have a second form, and certainly not one in the way we'd ever seen before, not even in the way we saw Ulquiorra access via his Segunda Etapa. No, Yami completely changes. I mean to the point where he could almost be an entirely different character between Resurrections. It's extraordinarily weird and completely unprecedented, and so that's where I want to start today. Why is that? Why was Yami able to access a second form in the first place? What does it mean? And more importantly, what's the deal here? What's going on? Why is it so far removed from his initial form in regards to its design? The fact that Kubo left us hanging regarding this form entirely only makes it that much more tantalizing for me to look into. It will forever remain one of those Bleach mysteries. If you enjoyed today's video, guys, consider hitting subscribe when you're done with it. To help support the channel, it really does mean a lot. And also consider checking out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games, as well. I'm trying to reach 15,000 subs over there by the end of the year, and again, your support does make an enormous difference. So, what little do we actually know about Yami's second form? Calling it a second form is presumably accurate, and while I don't want to dig too deep into semantics, if it's merely actually just a changed up version of his Resurrection, a kind of upgrade, then I guess it's still the same form inherently, but I don't know, it seems to be, well, it definitely seems to be more than that. I mean, Yami kind of says as much, that this new form should technically be stronger, as his central ability is very simple. The angrier he gets, the stronger he gets. And that seems to translate into him transforming upon reaching a certain anger threshold, I guess you can call it. How you can measure anger, I don't know. Whether or not these anger thresholds are predetermined or not, I have absolutely no idea. But before we dive into the manga, I just want to reiterate once more that Yami's ability, the main ability of his era, feels like a proto-Schrift to me. It is very similar to how the Schrift operate, as opposed to the more regimented, bespoke, thematic ability sets of the majority of the Espada, where so many of their abilities and their powers can kind of be boiled down to actual, tangible attacks, different abilities, stages, that sort of thing. Yammy's entire ability operates on one blanket rule. As I said, the angrier he gets, the stronger he gets, and there are seemingly no defined parameters to this power. No limits, no guardrails. It is very similar then, in that way, to something like Mask de Masculine's Schrift, the Superstar, which again operates on a simple blanket rule. The cheers of Mask's fans are his strength. No details, no depth, and crucially, no boundaries. This is important, of course, because this is the basis for Yammy's transformation in the first place. Anyway, speaking of which, in chapter 383, Byakuya and Kenpachi seemingly deal a fatal finishing blow to Yami, but the Espada survives, albeit his head has almost been cleaved off. As noted by Kenpachi, Yami seems to go temporarily insane in this moment. His eyes are blank, he's sweating and twitching as he chuckles to himself over and over, telling the captains that they are really ticking him off. And as Yami begins to rage, screaming again and again that they are both dead, we see his transformation begin as his resurrection mutates. And hell, maybe mutation is the best term for whatever this form actually is. Now, the first phase of Yammy's era transforms him into a sort of dinosaur-like creature, a kind of multi-legged ankylosaur or something similar to that, and as he starts to change into this next phase, we see those legs being physically yanked back into his body. Now, the rest of the transformation ritual isn't visible, unfortunately. Yammy's flesh starts to literally bulge and bubble, and I've never been quite sure what's going on with his head in this shot. I always assumed he'd kind of just thrown it back as he kind of hollered in anger. But I don't know, it does look kind of weird. But as Byakuya and Kenpachi are forced to leap out of the way, the new Yami rises up before them. And yeah, I mean, this is a completely new form. No, a completely separate form. Maybe that's more accurate, although it goes by the same name. So again, mutation may still be the most correct. It's not as though this is a riff on Yammy's dinosaur appearance from the original iteration of Era. This is a totally different creature, for starters. Now, Yami takes the appearance of a gigantic ape, his once incredibly muscular physique now replaced by a colossal bulk, his lanky arms resting on the ground on either side of him, while his legs are now squat and bent and covered in fur. All of the many weird protrusions on Yammy's original resurrection have all been stripped away. The various tubes and spheres and whatnot that adorned his body are gone, replaced now only by a pair of absolutely massive horns on his back, as well as a kind of black ridged spine. Honestly, I'm sad that we didn't get to see this version of Yami fight, because in my opinion, this is a complete design upgrade over the original Resurrection. I don't know if that's a hot take or not, but it's how I feel. While there were some aspects of Yami's initial release that I liked, his hollow mask becoming his actual bottom jaw, for example, makes so much sense and looked awesome, I always thought it was, for the most part, a total mess, and had no idea really what it wanted to be. This, though, is a much more refined design, and much more in line with what I would expect from Kubo for an Espada. Yami's face has become more monstrous and rugged, with cracks forming in the very skin around his eyes. Meanwhile, his hollow mask is mostly the same, though his teeth are now uneven, cut sharp and crooked, while massive horns curve outwards from both his mask and the ridges atop his head. All in all, I think Era's second form is a great look for the character, but famously we don't get to see the rest of the fight play out. Instead, the next time we see Yami, although he is still in this second form, he is lying defeated on the sands of Hueco Mundo, where he slowly dies beside a despondent Kukupuro. Now here's a quick thought that's mostly unrelated. It's interesting that Yami dies on the page in front of us, yet shows no signs whatsoever of reverting back to his base form. It's been shown many times before that Resurrection works in a similar way to bankai, in that it disengages involuntarily when the Arrancar is near death, with many examples existing even among the Espada. Grimjo's release peels away after Ichigo defeats him, while Neutra is clearly back in his base form upon collapsing to the ground. The same is true of Ulquiorra, who, as he is turning to dust, is beginning to revert back to his original form as well. You can really see it in his face, in his eyes. While Stark, well, Stark's a bit of a weird one. Stark's eye patch shatters and breaks, but that could simply be Kubo's way of just telling us that Lillinette has definitely died as well. Either way, it is just a bit weird, but I don't think there's any hard and fast rule regarding it either, as multiple Espada also don't show any signs of reverting back either. Anyway, when he transforms, Yami tells Byakuya and Kenpachi that he's never been this mad before, which implies he's never transformed like this before either, before egging them on to keep making him angrier and angrier, perhaps implying that he can continue to transform even further still. He's also definitely bigger in general in this form than he was previously too, as the captains kind of look like specks before him, even in comparison to how Rukia, Renji and Chad looked beforehand. In fact, speaking of which, a better comparison to the era, instead of the superstar, is, and I kind of can't believe I'm saying this, but, well, it's Gerard's The Miracle. Right? I mean, we've said it before, Gerard is kind of just a Yami 2.0, amped up in every way, and that translates to their powers as well. In the same way, Yami seems to have this almost undefined ceiling for how many times he can transform each time a threshold is met. The exact same is true for Gerard as well, but his simply depends on him being killed over and over instead. And both of them grow bigger and bigger upon each return as well. The only difference is because Kubo didn't cut away from Gerard's fight, we actually got to see it happen multiple times. Let's return to some of those comparisons we discussed briefly earlier to see why Yami is something totally different. Of all the Arrancar I can think of, without looking it up, I definitely think Gio Vega, Averama, and then of course Ulquiorra are maybe the only two with a kind of defined second form of at least some description, though even then they all vary, which is what we're going to get into. During his fight with Izuru, when released, Averama carves into his own chest, running his talons along these markings to seemingly access an upgraded version of his Aguilar. In doing so, he sprouts an additional pair of wings, and the design on his mask changes as well, and this definitely feels like the clearest and most obvious example of someone simply, well, upgrading their Resurrection mid-fight, because nothing dramatically changes. This is very obviously the exact same form, just kind of dialed up a little bit. And then Gio Vega is a little different again, but the same principle applies. After Soifon insults him, he flies into a rage and begins to transform, growing huge as his entire body bulks out, and his hands are completely replaced by these savage-looking spikes, but even then it's just a riff on how his Zanpakuto looked in his Resurrection. Again though, he's quite clearly still just in his Tigre Estoc form from before, just now he's buff as hell. I believe this form of his is actually referred to as his combat form, though again, similarly to Yami in fact, we never get to see him use it, as he's immediately killed after it activates. So, Ulquiorra then is the only one of these characters to have a truly defined second form. So much so that it actually has a name, Segunda Etapa, which pretty much just means second stage. Segunda Etapa is clearly supposed to be a Resurrection's bankai equivalent, which in itself is quite a thought, and Ulquiorra believes he's the only Arrancar to have achieved it. And let's face it, Ulquiorra is kind of like Yami's minder, right? So if Yami, of all Arrancar, had it, Ulquiorra would certainly know. However, since Yami notes that he's never been so angry before, could he have maybe achieved it right here and then during the battle with the captains? But here's the real kicker regarding the Segunda Etapa. Ulquiorra still looks the same. Okay, not completely, obviously. This is clearly a different form, with a new appearance, new details and the like. It is considerably more changed up when compared with the likes of Gio Vega or Averama, but I mean, ultimately, it still just feels like an evolution of Ulquiorra's initial Resurrection. The bat motif is still clear and present, with both forms being characterized by their enormous black wings. In that way, Segunda Etapa really does look and feel like an actual evolution of Murcielago, in the same way Bankai tends to look and feel like an evolution of its Shikai. There is always some connection. You know, Ulquiorra's two forms, they look like they belong to the same family. In the same way, Senbonzakura Kageyoshi is quite clearly related to Senbonzakura, just evolved on a bigger scale. Meanwhile, whatever this second form of Yami's is, again, I have to stress, it is completely different. There is no real bridge here, there's no motif outside of Yami being gigantic, and I kind of feel like that is the only similarity between the two forms. If this truly were a Segunda Etapa, then Yami would surely have to resemble a dinosaur again, and specifically the ankylosaur that he once was. But no, Yami is now a huge hulking ape. In chapter 422, we can even see that his tail has become bushy and furry in line with his legs. Honestly, more than anything, I can't help but wonder if Kubo simply wanted a do-over with Yami's Resurrection design. But then if that were the case, well, what would be the point if you're not even going to show the fight? Unless, of course, Kubo planned to show the fight, but it simply didn't pan out. So, as we start to wrap up this slightly shorter video, I mean, what can we really learn from this? The easiest and most likely answer is that it's just another version, an evolution of Era. It's not a Segunda Etapa at all, it's not some different form. This is just what Yami can do, and maybe he would have kept changing into totally different things every time he hit a certain anger threshold. I mean, that's completely possible, and again does remind me a little of what Kubo was doing with Gerard, but it really feels very odd and not at all in line with the way Kubo was handling the Arrancar at large. Every single Arrancar in the series, pretty much without fail, has some kind of motif or theme that they stick to rigidly. It's often visible in their base forms, but really brought to the surface for all to see when they release their Zanpakuto. Every single one. For Yami to change into something completely unrelated to his original Resurrection is just pretty weird, and makes Era feel disjointed by comparison. Unless the particular ape that Yami is supposed to be is from prehistoric times or something, and he's meant to be representative of prehistoric animals as a group, but I don't really buy that, to be honest. Again, it's just not like Kubo, who is such a master at this sort of thing, to make such a drastic, seemingly disconnected change in such a random way, especially not where the Arrancar are concerned. Plus, Kubo already kind of did that whole fossilized animal theme thing with Barragan's Fraction, so again, I just don't see it. That being said, I do have a kind of Hail Mary idea as to what I think Yami's Resurrections may be referencing. It's a kind of group blanket reference that I think fits the two distinctly different creature designs that we get to see, and I'll get into that in a minute. Before that, though, there are just a couple of other points to look at before we kind of get to the end of things. When an Arrancar releases their Zanpakuto, all of their previously received wounds are healed. It's one of their big advantages over the Shinigami, and curiously, Yami entering this second form totally heals all of the wounds he had accumulated in his initial Resurrection. And those weren't just any old wounds either, his head was nearly carved off. For this transformation to completely reset the playing field for him, to the point where he's totally unharmed and as good as new, Well, I mean, that feels to me like an Arankar's release all over again. It's as if, when he hit the threshold and transformed, which, by the way, we have no idea if he can control or not, his Zanpakuto released again, and all of his wounds were healed. It's very weird. Again, that seems like a huge advantage. Is it a spirit energy thing, perhaps? After all, the only reason Yami is the Zero Espada in the first place is because of his unique ability to eat, sleep, and store Reryoku constantly, allowing him to acquire the power necessary to change his rank upon release. So, does he really have such enormously vast, maybe even near endless quantities of Reryoku at his disposal that he can essentially release his Zanpakuto over and over again and reap the benefits each time? Considering this is the first time he's reached this state, though, well, we have no idea if it's even possible for him to go any further than this. You would kind of assume maybe that Byakuya and Kenpachi would make him angrier again by the time he was nearly dead, and obviously when we see him in 422, he wasn't able to transform a third time, unless he didn't get angrier again and just kind of accepted his defeat, or maybe they defeated him too quickly for it to really kick in. And then, perhaps the weirdest element of all of this to me is the simple fact that Yami outright changes animals between transformations. And again, at least in my opinion, that seems to conflict with everything we know about Arankar and how their true hollow power, contained within the shell of a Zanpakuto, actually works. Now again, I do have a theory as to why this might be the case, which we'll get into in a moment, but this still is the weirdest aspect of this to me, because even with my theory as to why this might be, it seems kind of crazy, to be honest, that he would undergo such a dramatic transformation that doesn't seem to reflect his original power, because I didn't think hollow power, as far as Arankarization and their Zanpakuto was concerned, even worked like that, even could work like that. Why would Yami's true hollow power, regardless of theme, regardless of motif, why would it have two totally distinct appearances? Even if one of them is born of the other, it still doesn't seem to make any sense whatsoever. Again, like with every other Arankar, they all have a motif, and that motif never changes, because why would it? It's the shape of their power. Stark's motif is that of a wolf, Harabel's is a shark, Neutra's is a praying mantis, going back to Barragan's Fraction, and the idea of them being prehistoric animals. Geovega is a saber-toothed tiger, while Nerge is a mammoth. It doesn't make sense for Yami's motif to be a dinosaur, only to then instantly change and be an ape. They're not even remotely connected. Wouldn't that imply a totally different power at play? Or maybe even a true power, perhaps? Ultimately, though, again, I don't think any of that is the case. I think the most boring answer is also probably the most likely. That there's nothing really to this form, hence why we didn't see it do anything. It's just a slightly upgraded version of the original era, born out of Yami's anger, and it doesn't mean anything more than that. Maybe Kubo decided he did want to change Yami's overall design and motif, and so quickly whipped up an excuse for a transformation. Or maybe he just wanted to design another cool, huge monster. And that brings me to my final point, which is my kind of Hail Mary theory, at least in regards to Yami's overall motif, and maybe how any of this works, how any of this makes sense. Could the connective tissue between Yami's two different forms simply be Kaiju? You know, Kaiju essentially just refers to a subgenre of giant monsters in media, you know, obviously brought to prominence in film thanks to Godzilla mainly, though King Kong as well, and Godzilla and King Kong, they kind of reflect Yami's first and second resurrection, respectively. I mean, it's a very interesting idea to me, I'm just not entirely sure I buy it, which is why I considered it a Hail Mary and left it until the end here. Because I think it does kind of work, and the idea of it being Kaiju, doubled with Yami's gigantic size in Resurrection, is pretty neat, to be honest, but I mean, if that's the case, then I respect it, and I like it a little more, and it does make a little more sense to me, but I still don't love the fact that the animal motif changes, because as I said a minute ago, that just doesn't seem to make any sense in regards to how Yammy's power should look and work. Yami could have still represented a kaiju, or kaiju in general, by simply being one or the other, and it would have felt more consistent at the very least, if that is what Kubo is going for. He could have just been the giant ape from the start, and still represented kaiju. Either way, though, maybe that's solved the mystery behind Yami's motif and theming, I have no idea. And at the end of the day, it still doesn't explain what on earth this second form of his really is, and what it means, if anything at all. Alright guys, well that's it for today's video. As always, I do hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you took something of value away from it as well. Let me know down in the comments below, what do you think the deal is behind Yammy's mysterious second form? Is it a Segunda Etapa? I really don't think so. Kind of seems like Ulquiorra would have probably known about that. Even if Yami did just happen to achieve it in the midst of this fight, it doesn't seem like it's really on the same level of gravitas at all, to be totally honest. Plus, again, if it were a Segunda Etapa, I think it would stay much more in line with Yammy's original Resurrection design as well. So that seems like it's out the window, as far as I'm concerned. So it's probably just some kind of upgrade on his Resurrection, something that is unique to Yami, maybe thanks to him being the Zero Espada specifically. I mean, he's got to have something, right, that lets him stand out, that helps him to justify having that rank. But I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comments below. What's the deal with it swapping animals completely? Could Kaiju be the right answer in regards to what Yammy's theme is supposed to be? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below, so do please let me know. Alright guys, once again a massive thank you for watching, I really do appreciate it. Consider hitting subscribe down below if you haven't done already. Check out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games. Help us to hit 15,000 subs over there. We've got a couple of months to do it, and I am really hopeful that we can. And finally, a huge shout out goes out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon, without whom I couldn't do this at all. So thank you all so very much. It does mean the absolute world to me, and I really do appreciate it. Alright guys, until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.